Question 1. Market research demonstrates a significant increase in demand for sustainable investment options among a key demographic that Bright Horizons aims to serve. A marketing team member proposes a campaign that highlights this trend and suggests Bright Horizons is uniquely positioned to capitalize on it, implying that clients who engage with Bright Horizons will experience superior returns due to this focus. As a compliance officer reviewing this proposal, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Suggest the marketing team create a separate, internal document detailing the market research for the sales team, while the public-facing campaign focuses solely on general service offerings. Option B. Recommend that the campaign be postponed until further internal analysis can definitively prove Bright Horizons' superior performance in sustainable investments. Option C. Prove the campaign with a disclaimer stating that past performance is not indicative of future results and that all investments carry risk. Option D. Advise the marketing team to revise the campaign to focus on the growing interest in sustainable investing and how Bright Horizons offers a range of options in this area, without making specific claims about superior returns or guaranteed outcomes. Correct answer is C. Approve the campaign with a disclaimer stating that past performance is not indicative of future results and that all investments carry risk. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing a company's desire for growth and market share with the ethical obligation to provide accurate and non-misleading information to potential clients. The Bright Horizons hiring assessment test, in this context, is designed to evaluate a candidate's understanding of ethical conduct and regulatory compliance within the financial services industry. Careful judgment is required to ensure that marketing efforts do not cross the line into misrepresentation or create unrealistic expectations. The correct approach involves acknowledging the market research findings, but framing them responsibly within the context of Bright Horizons services. This means highlighting potential benefits and opportunities without making guarantees or implying guaranteed outcomes. The justification lies in adhering to principles of fair dealing and avoiding deceptive practices, which are fundamental to regulatory frameworks governing financial advice and marketing. Specifically, it aligns with guidelines that prohibit making unsubstantiated claims or predictions about investment performance. An incorrect approach would be to directly leverage the market research to promise specific returns, or to suggest that Bright Horizons services are a guaranteed path to achieving the outcomes indicated by the research. This would be a failure to comply with regulations that mandate truthful and transparent communication. Such an approach could mislead clients into believing that investment success is assured, which is never the case and could lead to regulatory scrutiny and damage to Bright Horizons' reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the market research entirely. While this avoids misrepresentation, it also represents a missed opportunity to engage potential clients based on relevant market trends. Ethically, it could be seen as a failure to adequately understand and respond to client needs and market dynamics, potentially hindering the company's ability to serve its clients effectively. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a multi-step evaluation. First, thoroughly understand the market research and its limitations. Second, consider the ethical implications of any proposed communication strategy, particularly regarding potential for misrepresentation or creating false expectations. Third, consult relevant regulatory guidelines and internal compliance policies to ensure all communications are accurate, fair, and not misleading. Finally, craft messaging that is informative and persuasive without being deceptive, focusing on the value proposition of Bright Horizons services in a realistic and responsible manner. Question 2. Examination of the data shows that a prospective client at Bright Horizons is eager to invest a significant sum of money and has expressed a strong desire to finalize the transaction within the day, citing an urgent personal need for rapid growth. You have identified an investment product that aligns with their stated goals, but also carries a moderate level of risk that the client may not fully appreciate given their urgency. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Bright Horizons representative? Option A. Proceed with the investment as the client is requesting, highlighting the potential for rapid growth and downplaying the associated risks to facilitate the quick transaction. Option B. Advise the client that the urgency of their request makes it impossible to conduct the necessary due diligence and recommend they seek advice elsewhere. Option C. Clearly explain the investment's risks and benefits in detail, confirm the client's understanding, and offer to schedule a follow-up meeting to allow them time to consider the information before making a decision. Option D. Execute the investment immediately to meet the client's stated deadline, assuming they have done their own research and are aware of the potential downsides. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the investment as the client is requesting, highlighting the potential for rapid growth and downplaying the associated risks to facilitate the quick transaction. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing a client's immediate financial needs with the long-term ethical and regulatory obligations of providing accurate and unbiased advice. The pressure to secure a sale, coupled with the client's stated desire for a quick decision, can lead to overlooking crucial disclosures or misrepresenting information, which carries significant regulatory and ethical risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all advice and actions align with the Bright Horizons Hiring Assessment Test's commitment to integrity and client well-being. The correct approach involves prioritizing full disclosure and client understanding over immediate sales closure. This means clearly explaining the risks and benefits of the proposed investment, ensuring the client comprehends the information, and allowing them sufficient time to make an informed decision without undue pressure. This aligns with the ethical principles of acting in the client's best interest and upholding professional standards of conduct, which are paramount in financial advisory roles. Regulatory frameworks typically mandate that clients receive all material information necessary to make informed decisions and are protected from misrepresentation or undue influence. An incorrect approach that involves downplaying the risks to expedite the sale would be a direct violation of regulatory requirements concerning disclosure and suitability. It would also breach ethical duties to be honest and transparent with clients. Misrepresenting the investment's characteristics or omitting critical details constitutes a failure to act in the client's best interest and could lead to significant regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and legal liability for both the individual and Bright Horizons. Another incorrect approach, that of proceeding with the sale without confirming the client's full understanding, fails to meet the standard of care expected of a financial professional. While not outright misrepresentation, it demonstrates a lack of diligence in ensuring the client is truly informed, which can still lead to detrimental outcomes for the client and regulatory scrutiny. It prioritizes transactional efficiency over client protection. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the core ethical and regulatory obligations relevant to the situation. 2. Assess the client's needs, understanding, and any potential vulnerabilities. 3. Clearly communicate all material information, including risks and benefits, in a manner the client can understand. 4. Ensure the client has adequate time and opportunity to ask questions and consider the information without pressure. 5. Document all interactions and advice provided. 6. If there is any doubt about the client's understanding or the suitability of the recommendation, err on the side of caution and postpone or decline the transaction. Question 3. Assessment of an employee at Bright Horizons who has learned of a significant, non-public development that is expected to materially impact a client's investment portfolio. The employee also holds a personal investment in a company that is directly related to this development. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee? Option A. Immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest to Bright Horizons Compliance Department and refrain from any trading activity related to the information until cleared. Option B. Continue with personal investment plans without disclosing the information, assuming it will not be noticed. Option C. Discuss the information with colleagues to gauge their opinions before reporting it. Option D. Trade on the information to benefit the client's portfolio before the public announcement. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the potential conflict of interest to Bright Horizons Compliance Department and refrain from any trading activity related to the information until cleared. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Bright Horizons due to the potential conflict between personal financial interests and the company's fiduciary duty to its clients. The employee's awareness of a significant upcoming event that could impact a client's investment portfolio, coupled with their personal investment in a related entity, creates a situation where insider information could be misused. This requires careful judgment to uphold ethical standards and regulatory compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to Bright Horizons Compliance Department and refraining from any trading activity related to the information until cleared. This upholds the company's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence by ensuring transparency and preventing any appearance of impropriety or insider trading. This aligns with the principles of acting in the best interest of clients and maintaining market integrity, which are fundamental to financial services regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Acting on the information by trading before the public announcement, even if the intention is to benefit the client, is a failure to disclose a conflict of interest and a potential violation of insider trading regulations. This approach prioritizes personal gain or a perceived client benefit over regulatory compliance and ethical transparency. Ignoring the information and continuing with personal investment plans without disclosure is a failure to identify and manage a potential conflict of interest. This approach neglects the responsibility to act with integrity and could lead to regulatory breaches if the information is indeed material non-public information. Discussing the information with colleagues outside of the compliance department before reporting it is a breach of confidentiality and could inadvertently spread material non-public information, creating further regulatory risks for both the individual and Bright Horizons. Professional reasoning. Professionals in the financial services industry must adopt a proactive and transparent approach to potential conflicts of interest. This involves a clear understanding of regulatory obligations, company policies, and ethical principles. When faced with a situation that could compromise these standards, the decision-making process should prioritize immediate disclosure to the appropriate internal channels, seeking guidance, and abstaining from any action that could be construed as unethical or illegal. This ensures the protection of clients, the firm, and the integrity of the financial markets. Question 4. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Bright Horizons employee who overhears a conversation suggesting a child in their care may be experiencing neglect at home, but the information is not definitive? Option A. Immediately report the overheard conversation to the designated safeguarding lead within Bright Horizons. Option B. Decide that the information is too vague and take no further action. Option C. Directly approach the child's parents to inquire about the overheard conversation. Option D. Discuss the overheard conversation with other colleagues to gauge their opinions. Correct answer is A. Immediately report the overheard conversation to the designated safeguarding lead within Bright Horizons. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Bright Horizons due to the inherent conflict between maintaining client confidentiality and the potential need to disclose information that could prevent harm. The difficulty lies in balancing legal obligations, ethical duties, and the company's internal policies, all while acting in the best interest of the child. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands without breaching trust or failing to act responsibly. The correct approach involves seeking guidance from a designated safeguarding lead or supervisor within Bright Horizons. This is the most professionally sound action because it adheres to the company's established safeguarding procedures, which are designed to comply with relevant UK legislation and guidelines concerning child protection. By escalating the concern to the appropriate internal authority, the employee ensures that the situation is handled by individuals trained in child protection, who can then make informed decisions about reporting to external agencies like Ofsted or the local authority's children's social care services, if necessary. This process upholds the duty of care owed to the child while respecting confidentiality protocols until a formal assessment is made. An incorrect approach would be to directly contact the child's parents without consulting the safeguarding lead. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the established safeguarding framework, potentially alerting individuals who may be involved in or aware of the concerning situation, thereby compromising the investigation or the child's safety. It also risks breaching confidentiality protocols if the information shared is not handled appropriately by the parents. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the concern and take no action. This is a severe ethical and regulatory failure. It demonstrates a disregard for the duty of care towards the child and a failure to comply with safeguarding obligations mandated by UK law and Bright Horizons' own policies. Such inaction could have serious consequences for the child's well-being and expose Bright Horizons to significant legal and reputational damage. Finally, An incorrect approach would be to discuss the concern with colleagues who are not part of the designated safeguarding team. While seemingly an attempt to gather opinions, this constitutes a breach of confidentiality and can lead to the spread of unsubstantiated information, potentially causing distress to the child and their family, and undermining the formal safeguarding process. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Recognizing a potential safeguarding concern. 2. Immediately consulting Bright Horizons safeguarding policy and identifying the designated safeguarding lead. 3. Escalating the concern to the designated safeguarding lead, providing all relevant details. 4. Following the guidance provided by the safeguarding lead and cooperating with any subsequent actions, which may include reporting to external agencies. Question 5. Implementation of a new marketing campaign at Bright Horizons involves creating promotional materials for a new investment product. A senior advisor suggests including a testimonial from a satisfied client that exaggerates the product's past performance and implies guaranteed future returns, believing it will significantly boost sales. The advisor argues that this is a common practice in the industry and that the client has agreed to the testimonial. What is the most appropriate course of action for the compliance officer at Bright Horizons? Option A. Suggest a more generic testimonial that focuses on the advisor's service rather than the product's performance. Option B. Approve the testimonial as is, given the client's consent and the advisor's belief that it reflects industry norms. Option C. Advise the advisor that the testimonial must be revised to accurately reflect past performance without making any guarantees about future returns, and ensure all claims are substantiated and compliant with regulatory advertising standards. Option D. Inform the advisor that such testimonials are generally not permitted and recommend removing it entirely from the campaign. The correct answer is B. Approve the testimonial as is, given the client's consent and the advisor's belief that it reflects industry norms. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate desires and the regulatory obligations of Bright Horizons. The need to balance client satisfaction with adherence to legal and ethical standards requires careful judgment. The correct approach involves prioritizing regulatory compliance and client well-being over potentially misleading or inappropriate marketing. This aligns with the fundamental ethical duty of care and the regulatory framework governing financial advice and client interactions, which mandates transparency, suitability, and the avoidance of misrepresentation. Specifically, it upholds principles of acting in the client's best interest and ensuring all communications are fair, clear, and not misleading. An incorrect approach that prioritizes the client's immediate request without considering regulatory implications fails to uphold the duty of care. This could lead to regulatory breaches, reputational damage for Bright Horizons, and potential harm to the client if the information provided is inaccurate or unsuitable. Another incorrect approach, which involves providing a vague or noncommittal response without addressing the core issue, also falls short. It fails to proactively guide the client towards appropriate and compliant actions, potentially leaving them misinformed or exposed to risk. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and regulatory considerations. This involves understanding the specific rules and guidelines applicable to the situation, assessing the potential risks and benefits of different actions, and consulting with supervisors or compliance departments when uncertainty exists. The ultimate goal is to make a decision that is both legally sound and ethically responsible, prioritizing the long-term interests of the client and the integrity of Bright Horizons. Question 6. Compliance review shows that a financial advisor at Bright Horizons has recommended a particular investment product to a client. While this product offers a higher commission to the advisor, a comparable product with a lower commission is also available and appears to meet the client's stated financial goals and risk tolerance equally well. The advisor has not explicitly discussed the commission differences with the client. Option A. Avoid mentioning commission structures to the client to prevent confusion and focus solely on the investment performance aspects of the products. Option B. Recommend the lower commission product as it aligns with the principle of prioritizing client cost-effectiveness when suitability is otherwise equal. Option C. Discuss the commission differences openly with the client. Explain the implications of each product's fee structure, and allow the client to make an informed decision based on their preferences. Option D. Proceed with recommending the higher commission product, assuming it is suitable for the client, and document the rationale based on the product's features. The correct answer is D. Proceed with recommending the higher commission product, assuming it is suitable for the client, and document the rationale based on the product's features. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the long-term integrity of financial advice and regulatory compliance. The advisor must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that recommendations are solely in the client's best interest, not influenced by personal gain or pressure. Careful judgment is required to uphold ethical standards and regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the client's financial situation and goals, followed by a recommendation that demonstrably serves those interests. This aligns with the fundamental ethical duty of acting in the client's best interest and the regulatory requirement to provide suitable advice. The advisor must document the rationale for any recommendation, ensuring it is based on objective criteria and the client's specific circumstances, thereby demonstrating compliance with fiduciary duties and suitability rules. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize the higher commission product without a clear, documented justification that it is superior for the client's specific needs. This could lead to a breach of the duty to act in the client's best interest and potential violations of suitability regulations, as the recommendation would appear to be driven by personal financial incentives rather than client benefit. Another incorrect approach would be to avoid discussing the commission differences altogether. This failure to disclose relevant information, particularly when it could influence a client's decision, undermines transparency and trust and may violate disclosure requirements. Finally, pressuring the client to accept the higher commission product, even if framed as a better opportunity, is unethical and likely regulatory noncompliant, as it overrides the client's autonomy and the advisor's duty to provide unbiased advice. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the client's needs and objectives. This is followed by an objective evaluation of all available options, considering their suitability, risks, and costs, including any associated commissions or fees. Transparency with the client regarding all relevant factors, including potential conflicts of interest, is paramount. Documentation of the decision-making process and the rationale for the final recommendation is essential for demonstrating compliance and ethical conduct. Question 7. During the evaluation of a critical client report for Bright Horizons, you discover a significant discrepancy in the data that could lead to an inaccurate conclusion. Your manager is pressing for the report to be submitted by the end of the day, emphasizing the client's urgent need for the information. You have identified the source of the discrepancy, but verifying it accurately will require additional time, likely pushing the submission past the deadline. What is the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Politely inform your manager of the data discrepancy and the time required for verification, proposing a revised submission timeline that ensures accuracy. Option B. Submit the report with the identified discrepancy, noting the potential inaccuracy in a separate internal memo to your manager. Option C. Fabricate data to reconcile the discrepancy and meet the deadline. Assuming the client will not notice. Option D. Withhold the report entirely until you are absolutely certain of its accuracy, without communicating the delay or the reason to your manager. Correct answer is B. Submit the report with the identified discrepancy, noting the potential inaccuracy in a separate internal memo to your manager. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate operational needs with the ethical obligation to maintain data integrity and client confidentiality. The pressure to deliver a report quickly can tempt individuals to cut corners, potentially compromising accuracy and trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions align with professional standards and regulatory expectations. The correct approach involves prioritizing data verification and accuracy, even if it causes a slight delay. This upholds the professional duty to provide reliable information and adheres to the implicit trust placed in Bright Horizons by its clients and stakeholders. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing data handling and professional conduct, emphasize accuracy and integrity as paramount. By taking the time to verify the data, the individual demonstrates a commitment to these principles, preventing potential reputational damage and regulatory scrutiny that could arise from submitting inaccurate information. An incorrect approach that involves submitting the report with known inaccuracies, despite the pressure, fails to meet the fundamental ethical and professional standard of truthfulness and accuracy. This could lead to incorrect business decisions based on flawed data, damaging client relationships, and potentially violating data protection regulations if sensitive information is misrepresented. Another incorrect approach, which involves fabricating data to meet the deadline, is a severe ethical breach. This not only undermines the integrity of the report, but also constitutes fraudulent behavior, carrying significant legal and professional consequences, including potential disciplinary action and loss of professional standing. A third incorrect approach, which involves withholding the report indefinitely without communicating the issue, is also professionally unsound. It fails to address the operational need for the report and demonstrates a lack of proactive problem-solving and communication, which are essential professional skills. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and professional obligations. This involves considering the impact of potential actions on clients, the company, and oneself. When faced with conflicting pressures, such as a tight deadline versus data accuracy, the framework should prioritize adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical principles. This often involves clear communication with stakeholders about any challenges and proposing solutions that uphold integrity, even if they require adjustments to timelines. Question 8. Compliance review shows that a junior staff member at Bright Horizons has inadvertently shared a document containing sensitive employee personal information with an external vendor who does not have a legitimate business need for it. The staff member believes they can retrieve the document and delete it from the vendor's system before anyone notices, thus avoiding any formal reporting. Option A. Instruct the junior staff member to retrieve and delete the document discreetly and monitor the situation to ensure no further issues arise. Option B. Advise the junior staff member to inform the vendor that the document was sent in error and request its immediate deletion without involving internal compliance. Option C. Immediately report the incident to the Bright Horizons Data Protection Officer and follow the company's established data breach incident response protocol. Option D. Ignore the incident as the staff member believes they can resolve it internally and prevent any actual harm or breach. Correct answer is C. Immediately report the incident to the Bright Horizons Data Protection Officer and follow the company's established data breach incident response protocol. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate operational needs with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. The pressure to meet targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential compliance issues, which could have severe consequences for Bright Horizons. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken are not only effective in the short term, but also sustainable and compliant in the long term. The correct approach involves proactively addressing the identified concern by escalating it through the appropriate channels within Bright Horizons. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence. Specifically, reporting the potential data privacy breach to the designated compliance officer or legal department allows for a formal investigation and the implementation of corrective actions. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the regulatory expectation that organizations have robust mechanisms for identifying and mitigating risks, particularly those related to sensitive data. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the concern due to time constraints or the perceived minor nature of the issue. This failure to investigate could lead to a significant data privacy violation, resulting in regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of trust from clients and employees. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to fix the issue informally without proper documentation or oversight. This bypasses established compliance procedures and could result in an inadequate solution or the creation of new risks. Furthermore, failing to report the issue to senior management or the compliance team means that the organization is not aware of a potential risk, hindering its ability to manage it effectively. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Recognizing and understanding potential risks, especially those related to data privacy and security. 2. Knowing and adhering to internal company policies and procedures for reporting and addressing compliance concerns. 3. escalating issues through the designated reporting lines, ensuring that relevant stakeholders are informed. 4. Documenting all actions taken and decisions made. 5. Seeking guidance from compliance or legal departments when unsure about the appropriate course of action. This systematic approach ensures that potential issues are managed responsibly and in accordance with all applicable laws and ethical standards. Question 9. Performance analysis shows that a particular Bright Horizons childcare center is consistently falling short of its projected enrollment targets for the quarter. Your direct supervisor, under pressure to meet company-wide performance metrics, suggests adjusting the reporting of active enrollments to include children who have expressed interest but not yet completed the registration process to make the numbers appear stronger. Option A. Politely but firmly refuse the supervisor's suggestion, explaining that such an adjustment would misrepresent the actual enrollment figures and violate Bright Horizons' commitment to accurate financial reporting and regulatory compliance. Option B. Report the performance shortfall to the relevant regulatory body immediately, without first discussing it with your supervisor or attempting to find an internal solution. Option C. Discuss the performance shortfall with the supervisor and propose developing a targeted marketing campaign to increase actual enrollments, while continuing to report current figures accurately. Option D. Implement the supervisor's suggestion to adjust the reporting of active enrollments to include prospective registrations, as this will help the center meet its targets and avoid negative repercussions. The correct answer is A. Politely but firmly refuse the supervisor's suggestion, explaining that such an adjustment would misrepresent the actual enrollment figures and violate Bright Horizons' commitment to accurate financial reporting and regulatory compliance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's operational needs with the ethical obligation to maintain accurate and transparent financial reporting. The pressure to meet targets can create a temptation to misrepresent performance, which directly conflicts with regulatory requirements and professional integrity. Careful judgment is needed to identify and address potential misrepresentations without compromising ethical standards or legal compliance. The correct approach involves a commitment to accurate financial reporting, even when it means acknowledging performance shortfalls. This aligns with the fundamental principles of financial regulation, which demand transparency and honesty in all disclosures. By proactively addressing the performance gap and communicating it truthfully, the individual upholds their professional duty and avoids potential regulatory sanctions or reputational damage for Bright Horizons. This approach prioritizes long-term trust and compliance over short-term gains. An incorrect approach that involves manipulating figures to meet targets is a direct violation of financial regulations. Such actions constitute misrepresentation and can lead to severe penalties, including fines and legal action against both the individual and Bright Horizons. This approach erodes trust with stakeholders and undermines the integrity of financial reporting. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the performance analysis and hope the issue resolves itself, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of accountability and a failure to address potential problems proactively. It can lead to a worsening situation and greater difficulty in rectifying the issues later, potentially resulting in more significant regulatory scrutiny and damage to Bright Horizons' reputation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of relevant financial regulations and ethical codes. When faced with performance data that suggests a potential misrepresentation, professionals should 1. Verify the accuracy of the data. 2. Consult with relevant internal stakeholders and potentially legal counsel if there is uncertainty. 3. Prioritize truthful and transparent reporting, even if it means acknowledging unfavorable results. 4. Document all decisions and communications related to the performance analysis and reporting. Question 10. Compliance review shows a potential gap in Bright Horizons' adherence to a specific data privacy guideline related to the collection of parent information. The review indicates that, while data is collected, the consent mechanism might not be fully explicit as required by the guideline. Your immediate supervisor, under pressure to meet enrollment targets, suggests downplaying the finding in the next report to avoid delays in processing new enrollments. What is the most appropriate professional course of action? Option A. Immediately initiate a formal review of the consent mechanism, develop a remediation plan to ensure full compliance, and report the findings and proposed actions to the compliance department and relevant management. Option B. Proceed with the supervisor's suggestion to downplay the finding in the report, assuming that the risk is minimal and that the focus should remain on achieving enrollment targets. Option C. Inform the compliance department of the supervisor's suggestion to downplay the finding, without independently verifying the extent of the compliance gap. Option D. Acknowledge the finding but suggest to your supervisor that the current process is likely sufficient and that further action is unnecessary to avoid impacting enrollment numbers. Correct answer is A. Immediately initiate a formal review of the consent mechanism, develop a remediation plan to ensure full compliance, and report the findings and proposed actions to the compliance department and relevant management. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate operational needs with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. The pressure to meet targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential compliance issues. Careful judgment is required to ensure that short-term gains do not compromise the integrity of Bright Horizons operations and its commitment to regulatory adherence. The correct approach involves proactively addressing the identified compliance gap by implementing corrective actions and documenting the process. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, which is paramount for maintaining trust with stakeholders and avoiding potential penalties. Specifically, by initiating a review and developing a remediation plan, the employee is acting in accordance with the principles of good corporate governance and the spirit of regulatory frameworks that emphasize a proactive and preventative approach to compliance. This aligns with the expectation that employees will identify and report potential issues and contribute to their resolution. An incorrect approach of ignoring the findings or delaying action would be professionally unacceptable. This failure to act on a known compliance issue constitutes a breach of professional duty and potentially violates regulatory requirements that mandate timely reporting and remediation of noncompliance. Such an action could lead to escalated problems, reputational damage, and significant legal or financial repercussions for Bright Horizons. Furthermore, attempting to conceal or minimize the issue would be a direct ethical failure, undermining the transparency and accountability expected of all employees. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the issue and its potential impact. 2. Consulting relevant policies, procedures, and regulatory guidance. 3. Escalating the issue to the appropriate internal stakeholders or compliance department. 4. Developing and implementing a corrective action plan. 5. Documenting all steps taken. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with the company's commitment to ethical and legal standards. Question 11. The performance metrics show a consistent pattern of minor deviations in client billing reports at Bright Horizons, which, while individually small, collectively suggest a potential systemic issue. You have identified a specific instance where a client's service charge appears to have been miscalculated, resulting in a slight overcharge. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Attempt to manually adjust the client's billing record to correct the perceived overcharge without informing anyone, to avoid potential scrutiny. Option B. Discuss your concerns about the billing discrepancies with a trusted colleague in another department to get their opinion before taking any action. Option C. Immediately report the observed discrepancy and the specific instance of miscalculation to your direct supervisor and the compliance department, detailing your findings. Option D. Overlook the minor discrepancy, assuming it is an administrative error that will likely correct itself over time, and focus on meeting your performance targets. Correct answer is C. Immediately report the observed discrepancy and the specific instance of miscalculation to your direct supervisor and the compliance department, detailing your findings. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's stated commitment to ethical conduct and client well-being with the pressure to meet performance targets. The temptation to overlook minor discrepancies for the sake of achieving metrics can lead to significant ethical and regulatory breaches. Careful judgment is required to ensure that client interests are always prioritized over short-term performance gains. The correct approach involves immediately escalating the observed discrepancy to the appropriate internal compliance or management channels. This upholds the principle of transparency and ensures that potential issues are addressed proactively by those with the authority and responsibility to investigate and rectify them. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate reporting of suspicious activities or breaches of conduct, and ethical guidelines that emphasize integrity and accountability. By escalating, the individual acts as a responsible gatekeeper, preventing potential harm to clients and the company's reputation. An incorrect approach of ignoring the discrepancy, even if it seems minor, fails to uphold the duty of care owed to clients and breaches regulatory requirements for vigilance and reporting. This could lead to ongoing harm to clients and expose Bright Horizons to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach of attempting to fix the discrepancy without proper authorization or documentation is also professionally unacceptable. This bypasses established internal controls and procedures, potentially masking the issue rather than resolving it, and could be construed as an attempt to mislead or falsify records, which carries severe ethical and legal consequences. A further incorrect approach of discussing the discrepancy with colleagues outside of official reporting channels, without a clear need to know or authorization, could lead to the spread of misinformation, damage to professional reputations, and could be seen as a breach of confidentiality. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's code of conduct, relevant regulations, and reporting procedures. When faced with a potential ethical or regulatory concern, professionals should ask themselves, does this action protect the client's interests? Does this action comply with Bright Horizons policies and relevant laws? And would I be comfortable if this action were publicly known? If the answer to any of these is no, escalation through the proper channels is the appropriate course of action. Question 12. Compliance review shows a potential gap in Bright Horizons data privacy protocols concerning the handling of sensitive client information. Simultaneously, a new time-sensitive marketing campaign is scheduled to launch next month, which will involve collecting additional client data. The marketing team is eager to proceed with the campaign as planned. What is the most appropriate course of action for the compliance officer? Option A. Implement a temporary, less rigorous data handling procedure for the marketing campaign to meet the launch deadline, with plans to formalize it later. Option B. Proceed with the marketing campaign as scheduled, with a commitment to address the data privacy gap after the campaign launch. Option C. Delegate the responsibility of addressing the data privacy gap to the marketing team, allowing them to proceed with the campaign. Option D. Immediately halt the launch of the marketing campaign until the data privacy gap is fully investigated and remediated. The correct answer is D. Immediately halt the launch of the marketing campaign until the data privacy gap is fully investigated and remediated. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate operational needs with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. The pressure to meet performance targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential compliance issues, which could have severe consequences if discovered later. Careful judgment is required to ensure that short-term gains do not compromise the integrity of Bright Horizons operations and its commitment to its clients and stakeholders. The correct approach involves prioritizing the thorough investigation and remediation of the identified compliance gap before proceeding with the new initiative. This demonstrates a commitment to upholding regulatory standards and ethical business practices. Specifically, it aligns with the principle of proactive compliance, which is often mandated or strongly encouraged by regulatory bodies. By addressing the existing issue first, Bright Horizons mitigates the risk of further noncompliance, protects its reputation, and ensures that any new initiatives are built on a solid foundation of regulatory adherence. This approach reflects a responsible corporate culture that values integrity over expediency. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the new initiative without fully addressing the compliance gap. This could be justified by a desire to meet deadlines or capitalize on market opportunities, but it carries significant regulatory and ethical risks. The failure here lies in the disregard for existing regulatory requirements. This could lead to penalties, fines, reputational damage, and a loss of trust from clients and regulators. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a superficial fix to the compliance gap, hoping it goes unnoticed. This is ethically unsound as it involves a deliberate attempt to circumvent regulatory oversight and demonstrates a lack of genuine commitment to compliance. It also leaves Bright Horizons vulnerable to future discovery and more severe repercussions. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying and understanding the specific regulatory requirements and potential ethical implications. 2. Assessing the severity and potential impact of any identified noncompliance. 3. Consulting with relevant internal departments, e.g., legal, compliance, and external experts if necessary. 4. Developing and implementing a plan to address the noncompliance thoroughly before proceeding with new activities. 5. Documenting all steps taken and decisions made. This structured approach ensures that decisions are well-informed, defensible, and aligned with the highest professional standards. Question 13. The risk matrix shows a potential, albeit minor, regulatory compliance issue identified during the planning phase of a new Bright Horizons childcare facility expansion. Addressing this issue will likely cause a significant delay and incur unexpected costs, potentially impacting quarterly financial targets. Your direct manager is keen to proceed without further investigation, suggesting it's a minor oversight that won't be noticed. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Attempt to resolve the compliance issue independently and discreetly before informing anyone to avoid delays and additional expenses. Option B. Inform your manager that you are uncomfortable proceeding and suggest they seek external legal advice without involving internal compliance. Option C. Proceed with the expansion as planned, assuming the issue is minor and unlikely to be detected. To meet the quarterly financial targets, Option D. Immediately escalate the identified compliance issue to the Bright Horizons Compliance Department for their review and guidance, regardless of the potential impact on project timelines or costs. The correct answer is D. Immediately escalate the identified compliance issue to the Bright Horizons Compliance Department for their review and guidance, regardless of the potential impact on project timelines or costs. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet targets can create a conflict of interest, where the temptation to overlook minor breaches for short-term gain is present. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions align with the Bright Horizons commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence, even when faced with potential financial repercussions. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and reporting the potential breach, even if it means delaying a project and incurring additional costs. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency, integrity, and regulatory compliance. By immediately escalating the issue to the compliance department, the employee upholds their fiduciary duty to the company and its stakeholders, ensuring that any potential regulatory violations are addressed promptly and appropriately. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the ethical standards expected of employees in regulated industries. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the project without disclosing the potential issue, hoping it goes unnoticed. This is ethically unsound, as it involves intentional concealment of a potential regulatory breach, which could lead to severe penalties for Bright Horizons and damage its reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to resolve the issue independently without involving the compliance department. This bypasses established internal controls and could result in an inadequate or non-compliant resolution, potentially exacerbating the problem. Finally, ignoring the issue altogether and hoping it resolves itself is negligent and demonstrates a disregard for regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Recognizing and understanding the potential ethical or regulatory conflict. 2. Consulting relevant company policies and regulatory guidelines. 3. Seeking advice from appropriate internal departments, such as compliance or legal. 4. Acting with integrity and transparency, even if it leads to short-term inconvenience or cost. 5. Documenting all actions and communications related to the issue. Question 14. Quality control measures reveal a minor deviation in a recently implemented educational resource at a Bright Horizons Learning Center. The deviation does not appear to impact the core learning objectives of the resource, but it is a departure from the documented standard. You are the center manager. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Immediately document the deviation and initiate a formal report to regional management and the curriculum development team for review and guidance. Option B. Attempt to discreetly correct the deviation yourself to avoid causing unnecessary concern or administrative burden. Option C. Ignore the deviation, assuming it is too minor to warrant attention and will likely go unnoticed. Option D. Conduct a brief, informal check to see if the deviation is easily fixable, and if so, make the adjustment without further documentation or reporting. The correct answer is A. Immediately document the deviation and initiate a formal report to regional management and the curriculum development team for review and guidance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need to address a potential quality issue with the company's established procedures and the ethical obligation to report accurately. The complexity arises from the potential for a minor deviation to be perceived as a significant problem, impacting client trust and regulatory compliance if handled improperly. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate level of escalation and communication. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented investigation of the quality control finding before reporting. This demonstrates a commitment to accuracy and due diligence, aligning with the principles of professional integrity and responsible business practice. By investigating first, the employee ensures that any report made to management or regulatory bodies is based on verified facts, preventing unnecessary alarm and potential reputational damage to Bright Horizons. This proactive and evidence-based method is crucial for maintaining a culture of accountability and transparency. An incorrect approach of immediately escalating the issue without further investigation fails to uphold the principle of proportionality. It could lead to an overreaction, consuming valuable resources and potentially causing undue concern for a minor or non-existent problem. This approach lacks the necessary due diligence and could be seen as alarmist. Another incorrect approach of attempting to rectify the issue independently without reporting it first is ethically problematic. It bypasses established reporting channels and could conceal a potential systemic issue. This action undermines transparency and accountability, potentially leading to more significant problems down the line if the underlying cause is not identified and addressed through proper channels. It also violates the trust placed in employees to report concerns accurately and promptly. A further incorrect approach of dismissing the finding as insignificant without proper assessment is also professionally unacceptable. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for quality control processes. This could lead to the recurrence of the issue or the escalation of a minor problem into a more serious one, ultimately impacting the reputation and operational integrity of Bright Horizons. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes fact-finding, adherence to established protocols, and ethical reporting. This involves 1. Understanding the nature of the finding and its potential impact. 2. Consulting relevant company policies and procedures for handling quality control issues. 3. Conducting a thorough, documented investigation to verify the finding and its severity. 4. Reporting the verified findings through the appropriate channels, providing clear and concise information. 5. Cooperating with any subsequent investigations or corrective actions. Question 15. Investigation of a long-standing client at Bright Horizons expresses a desire to invest in a complex, illiquid alternative asset that carries significant regulatory disclosure requirements and potential tax implications not fully understood by the client. The client is insistent on proceeding quickly to capitalize on perceived market opportunities and has hinted that they might seek advice elsewhere if the advisor raises too many objections. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Bright Horizons advisor? Option A. Fully disclose the regulatory requirements, potential risks, and tax implications associated with the proposed investment, and explore compliant alternative strategies if the client remains hesitant or unable to meet the disclosure obligations. Option B. Advise the client that the investment is too complex and suggest they seek advice from a specialist outside of Bright Horizons without offering any further guidance. Option C. Agree to facilitate the investment but downplay the regulatory disclosure requirements and tax implications to ensure the client's satisfaction and continued business. Option D. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, assuming they have conducted their own due diligence and are aware of the risks, to avoid losing their business. The correct answer is A. Fully disclose the regulatory requirements, potential risks, and tax implications associated with the proposed investment, and explore compliant alternative strategies if the client remains hesitant or unable to meet the disclosure obligations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate financial interests and the long-term regulatory obligations of a financial advisor. The advisor at Bright Horizons must navigate the pressure to retain business while upholding their fiduciary duty and adhering to the strict disclosure requirements mandated by financial regulations. Careful judgment is required to balance client relationships with the imperative of regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves transparently communicating the regulatory implications of the client's proposed transaction, even if it means potentially losing the business. This aligns with the advisor's duty of care and the regulatory framework's emphasis on informed consent and suitability. By clearly explaining the risks and the regulatory hurdles, the advisor acts in the client's best interest, fulfilling their fiduciary responsibility. This approach prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory adherence over short-term gain, which is a cornerstone of professional financial advice. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the transaction without fully disclosing the regulatory challenges or attempting to circumvent them. This could lead to regulatory breaches, penalties for both the client and the advisor, and damage to the reputation of Bright Horizons. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without offering alternative compliance solutions. This fails to demonstrate a commitment to client service and could be perceived as unhelpful, potentially pushing the client to seek advice elsewhere without the benefit of regulatory guidance. Finally, agreeing to the transaction while downplaying the regulatory risks would be a severe ethical and regulatory failure, as it misleads the client and violates the principle of acting in their best interest. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and regulatory principles at play. This involves understanding the client's objectives, assessing the feasibility of those objectives within the existing regulatory landscape, and then communicating findings clearly and transparently. If a client's request conflicts with regulations, the professional's duty is to explain these conflicts, explore compliant alternatives, and document all discussions and decisions. Question 16. Compliance review shows that a financial advisor at Bright Horizons has been recommending a particular investment product to clients that offers a significantly higher commission to the advisor, even though a comparable product with a lower commission structure appears equally suitable for the client's stated financial goals and risk tolerance. Option A. Recommend the product that best meets the client's specific financial goals and risk tolerance, regardless of the commission structure, and document the rationale clearly. Option B. Avoid recommending any product and instead advise the client to research options independently due to the commission conflict. Option C. Recommend the product that offers the highest commission, provided it is generally suitable for the client's profile. Option D. Recommend the higher commission product but disclose the commission difference to the client, allowing them to make the final decision. The correct answer is C. Recommend the product that offers the highest commission, provided it is generally suitable for the client's profile. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the long-term integrity of financial advice and regulatory compliance. The advisor must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that recommendations are solely in the client's best interest, not influenced by personal gain or pressure. Careful judgment is required to uphold ethical standards and regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough, unbiased assessment of the client's financial situation and goals, followed by a recommendation of products that demonstrably meet those needs, even if they offer lower commissions. This aligns with the fiduciary duty and regulatory requirements that prioritize client interests above all else. Specifically, under the regulatory framework governing financial advice, assuming a UK/CISI context for this assessment, the advisor has a duty to act honestly, with integrity, and in the best interests of the client. This includes providing suitable advice and ensuring that any product recommendation is appropriate for the client's circumstances, knowledge, and experience. The absence of a commission-driven bias is paramount. An incorrect approach would be to recommend the higher commission product without a clear, documented justification that it is superior for the client's specific needs. This would likely violate the principle of acting in the client's best interests and could be seen as a breach of regulatory conduct rules, potentially leading to disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach would be to avoid making a recommendation altogether due to the commission difference, as this fails to meet the client's need for advice and could be interpreted as a dereliction of professional duty. Finally, pressuring the client to accept the higher commission product, even if subtly, is a clear ethical and regulatory failure, as it prioritizes the advisor's gain over the client's welfare. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the client's needs and objectives. This is followed by researching and evaluating all available suitable options, considering factors like risk, return, cost, and suitability. The decision must then be justifiable based on these client-centric factors, with transparency regarding any potential conflicts of interest, such as commission structures. If a conflict exists, the advisor must ensure it does not compromise the quality or suitability of the advice provided. Question 17. Compliance review shows that a recent onboarding session for new Bright Horizons educators included a brief mention of child protection policies, but did not delve into the specific reporting procedures for suspected abuse as mandated by the relevant regulatory framework. A senior educator, who facilitated the session, noted this omission, but proceeded with the rest of the agenda to ensure all topics were covered within the allotted time. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the senior educator to take? Option A. Document the omission in their personal notes and plan to address it in the next scheduled training session. Option B. Assume that the new educators will learn the reporting procedures through on-the-job experience and informal guidance. Option C. Discreetly inform the new educators about the reporting procedures after the session concludes without formal documentation. Option D. Immediately report the omission to the Bright Horizons Compliance Department and recommend a review of the onboarding training materials. Correct answer is A. Document the omission in their personal notes and plan to address it in the next scheduled training session. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate operational needs with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. The pressure to meet targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential compliance issues, which could have severe consequences for Bright Horizons, including reputational damage, financial penalties, and loss of trust from clients and regulators. Careful judgment is required to ensure that short-term gains do not compromise the company's integrity and legal standing. The correct approach involves proactively addressing the identified compliance gap by initiating a formal review and implementing corrective actions. This demonstrates a commitment to upholding regulatory standards and ethical conduct, specifically reporting the issue to the compliance department and suggesting a review of the training materials aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory adherence. This approach prioritizes transparency, accountability, and the mitigation of risk, ensuring that Bright Horizons operates within the bounds of its regulatory framework. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the observation as minor or to delay action. Ignoring the potential noncompliance, even if it seems insignificant at the time, creates a risk of future regulatory scrutiny and potential breaches. This failure to act promptly and decisively undermines the company's compliance culture and could lead to more serious issues down the line. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to rectify the issue informally without involving the compliance department. This bypasses established procedures, lacks proper documentation, and could result in inconsistent or inadequate solutions, failing to address the root cause of the problem and potentially creating new compliance risks. Professionals should approach such situations by first recognizing the potential implications of any observed deviation from established procedures or regulations. They should then consult internal policies and regulatory guidelines to understand the specific requirements. The next step is to report the observation through the appropriate channels, such as the compliance department, and to advocate for a thorough review and the implementation of necessary corrective actions. This systematic process ensures that compliance is integrated into daily operations and that potential risks are managed effectively. Question 18. When evaluating a potential safety hazard in one of the Bright Horizons facilities, you notice a loose railing on a climbing structure that could pose a risk to children. You are aware that the center is currently under pressure to meet its quarterly enrollment targets. Which of the following actions best reflects professional and ethical conduct? Option A. Discreetly attempt to secure the railing yourself to avoid causing alarm or impacting enrollment numbers. Option B. Inform a colleague about the railing but decide not to report it officially until after the enrollment period concludes. Option C. Immediately report the loose railing to your direct supervisor and follow Bright Horizons' established safety reporting procedures. Option D. Wait to see if the railing becomes a problem before taking any action to avoid unnecessary disruption. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the loose railing to your direct supervisor and follow Bright Horizons' established safety reporting procedures. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with the long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance expected of Bright Horizons. The pressure to meet targets can create a conflict of interest, where an employee might be tempted to overlook or downplay issues that could impact revenue or client satisfaction. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions align with Bright Horizons' commitment to quality care and regulatory standards, rather than solely focusing on short-term financial gains. The correct approach involves prioritizing the well-being of the children and adherence to regulatory requirements above all else. This means immediately reporting the observed safety concern to the appropriate supervisor and following established company protocols for addressing such issues. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant because it upholds the duty of care owed to the children, ensures transparency within the organization, and allows for prompt corrective action to mitigate any risks. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing childcare facilities, mandate that safety concerns are addressed without delay to protect vulnerable individuals. By acting proactively and transparently, the employee demonstrates integrity and commitment to the core values of Bright Horizons. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the safety concern or to delay reporting it in the hope that it resolves itself or is not noticed. This failure to act is a direct violation of the duty of care and potentially breaches regulatory requirements that mandate reporting of hazards. It also undermines the trust placed in the employee by parents and regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to fix the issue independently without informing management or following company procedures. While the intention might be to resolve the problem quickly, this bypasses established safety protocols, could lead to inadequate repairs, and prevents proper documentation and oversight, which are crucial for regulatory compliance and accountability. Furthermore, it could create a situation where the employee is solely responsible for any negative consequences, rather than the company as a whole. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and regulatory obligations. In situations involving potential harm or noncompliance, the immediate priority must be the safety and well-being of those affected and adherence to the law. This involves understanding company policies and relevant regulations, seeking clarification if needed, and acting with integrity and transparency. When in doubt, erring on the side of caution and reporting the concern through the proper channels is always the most responsible course of action. Question 19. Strategic planning requires Bright Horizons to develop a competitive bid for a new service contract. A key member of the bid team previously worked for a direct competitor and has intimate knowledge of that competitor's operational strategies and pricing models from their prior role. This individual is now being asked to contribute their expertise to Bright Horizons' bid preparation. What is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible approach for Bright Horizons to take in this situation? Option A. The individual should be allowed to contribute to the bid preparation, but with strict guidelines to only use publicly available information and their general industry experience, explicitly prohibiting the use of any confidential information from their previous employer. Option B. The individual should be excluded from all bid preparation activities related to this specific contract to avoid any potential conflict of interest or breach of confidentiality. Option C. The individual should be encouraged to share any insights they have about the competitor's weaknesses, as this information could be valuable for Bright Horizons to gain a competitive edge. Option D. The individual should be fully involved in the bid preparation, using their knowledge to help Bright Horizons craft a superior proposal that anticipates and counters the competitor's likely strategies. Correct answer is D. The individual should be fully involved in the bid preparation, using their knowledge to help Bright Horizons craft a superior proposal that anticipates and counters the competitor's likely strategies. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's strategic goals with the ethical obligation to maintain client confidentiality and avoid conflicts of interest. The pressure to secure a new contract for Bright Horizons must not override fundamental professional duties. Careful judgment is required to navigate the potential for insider information to influence a competitive bidding process. The correct approach involves prioritizing ethical conduct and regulatory compliance over immediate business gains. This means refraining from using any information obtained through the previous engagement with the competitor to inform Bright Horizons' bid. Instead, the focus should be on developing a competitive proposal based on publicly available information, Bright Horizons' own expertise, and a thorough understanding of the market. This upholds the principles of fair competition and avoids any appearance of impropriety, which is crucial for maintaining trust and reputation within the industry, and adhering to professional codes of conduct that typically prohibit the misuse of confidential information. An incorrect approach would be to leverage the insights gained from the previous client. This could manifest as subtly tailoring Bright Horizons' proposal to directly counter or exploit weaknesses identified in the competitor's previous strategy, or by making assumptions about the competitor's pricing or service offerings based on privileged information. Such actions would constitute a breach of confidentiality and potentially an unfair competitive practice, violating ethical guidelines and potentially regulatory frameworks that govern fair business dealings and professional conduct. Another incorrect approach would be to disclose the sensitive information to the Bright Horizons bid team. This would be a direct violation of confidentiality agreements and professional ethics, creating a significant legal and reputational risk for Bright Horizons. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential ethical conflicts and regulatory implications. This involves consulting relevant professional codes of conduct and company policies. The next step is to consider the potential consequences of each course of action, both for the individual and the organization. Seeking guidance from a supervisor or legal counsel is advisable when in doubt. Ultimately, the decision should align with the highest ethical standards and ensure compliance with all applicable regulations, even if it means foregoing a potential short-term advantage. Question 20. Analysis of a situation where a Bright Horizons employee, Sarah, is approached by her close friend, Mark, who works in a different department. Mark is concerned about a potential upcoming restructuring and asks Sarah if she has any information about which departments might be affected, as he is worried about his job security. Sarah has recently seen a confidential internal memo outlining potential departmental changes. Option A. Sarah shares the specific details of the memo with Mark, emphasizing that he should not tell anyone she told him. Option B. Sarah shares a general overview of the memo with Mark, assuring him that it's just preliminary information and not to worry too much. Option C. Sarah politely declines to discuss the memo, explaining that she is bound by confidentiality agreements and cannot share any non-public information, even with friends. Option D. Sarah tells Mark that she cannot discuss the memo, but suggests he speak to his direct manager to get accurate information about departmental changes. The correct answer is C. Sarah politely declines to discuss the memo, explaining that she is bound by confidentiality agreements and cannot share any non-public information, even with friends. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Bright Horizons due to the potential conflict between personal relationships and professional responsibilities, specifically concerning the disclosure of sensitive information. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining confidentiality and avoiding conflicts of interest, which are paramount in any professional setting, especially within an organization like Bright Horizons that handles personal data and operates under strict regulatory oversight. Careful judgment is required to navigate the ethical and potentially legal implications of sharing information. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to Bright Horizons' internal policies on data privacy and confidentiality, as well as any relevant external regulations that govern the handling of employee or client information. This means refraining from sharing any non-public information, even with a close friend, unless explicitly authorized and for a legitimate business purpose. This upholds the trust placed in the employee by Bright Horizons and its stakeholders, and prevents potential breaches of privacy or security. An incorrect approach would be to share the information, even with the intention of seeking advice or out of a sense of loyalty to a friend. This action would constitute a breach of confidentiality, violating Bright Horizons' internal policies and potentially contravening data protection laws. Such a breach could lead to disciplinary action, damage to the company's reputation, and legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that because the friend is trustworthy, the disclosure is acceptable. This overlooks the fundamental principle that confidentiality obligations are not based on personal trust, but on professional duty and regulatory requirements. The information itself is protected, regardless of the recipient's character. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves first identifying the nature of the information and the applicable policies and regulations. If there is any doubt about whether information can be shared, the default position should be to not share it. Seeking guidance from a supervisor or the compliance department is always a prudent step when faced with uncertainty. This proactive approach ensures that decisions are made in alignment with professional standards and organizational integrity.